Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Odd Lots podcast. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal.
Joe, I have a present for you.
Okay. I'm excited.
It's December 10th.
Yeah.
Christmas is coming up.
Christmas present. Cool. Hanukkah present.
Here you go.
Let me see, what is this? Okay. It's from qualitysprays.com. And it's, wait, that seems like an illegal drug. It says oxytocin.
It's not illegal. It's not illegal. I got it off Amazon for like $60.
Oxytocin, that sounds illegal.
It's not.
Okay.
Do you know what oxytocin actually is?
I'm sure it's really bad.
It's a peptide.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I actually don't even know what a peptide is. I've been hearing this word peptide. I don't know what classification of chemical or molecule chain or anything a peptide is. But I've been hearing about this word peptide more and more.
This is important.
Thank you. You actually going to give this to me, or is this just a prop that I have to give
It's just
back?
a prop.
Okay.
And I just said that it's yours, but it's actually mine. Okay, peptides. Peptides are the P in GLP-1s that are so popular.
I think I do. Yeah, I think I knew GLP-1s was a peptide, but I still don't. What is it? Anyway.
All right. The reason you're hearing about it a lot is because a lot of people seem to be using them in various ways. And there are all these different types of peptides that supposedly do different things for the body. This one apparently makes you better at eye contact and more sociable. So,
you know what's really funny? Mm-hmm. When I was I could have used this like 25 years ago. When I was younger, like in college, it didn't happen very often, but I occasionally went on a few dates. And it was very rare.
I'm not going to say anything.
Very rare occurrence. But one of the things I would notice is if I was out on a date and like the girl would start like messing with like her hair a little bit.
That means she likes you.
No. And she's like, is there something wrong with my hair? Because you keep looking like 3 inches above my eyes.
Oh.
And I'm like, no, I'm just very awkward. It's very difficult for me. And she's like, oh, I was like, it's just very awkward for me. I'm not very good at eye contact and so forth. And so I just assumed it was something in my hair that I was like trying to get out. And I was like, no, I'm sorry. I'm just like that.
This happened to you more than once?
Yes. So I could have really used a chemical that would solve the eye contact problem. Now I've grown up. I've grown out of it. I can look someone in the eye now.
I will say I have tested it. I'm not entirely convinced of its effects, but, you know, in the name of science for Odd Lots, I have been a guinea pig.
So we know GLP-1s, whatever they're called, Wegovy and all those are good for weight loss. And we know that it's almost a miracle drug, right? Everyone's like incredible. But in theory, there are other peptides out there that could be equivalently miraculous. We just don't really know about them, and maybe they're not sort of medicinalized the way that the weight loss ones are.
Yeah, and also not distributed the same way as GLP-1s in America. And we're going to get all into that because it's actually a really interesting topic, both culturally and from a supply chain perspective. And we love supply chains. So
we love supply chains.
All right. So for this particular topic, we're actually going to have two guests.
Great.
Because it's so interesting. And I got so into the
so
peptide world. Our first guest is Jasmine Sun. She is an independent writer covering AI and San Francisco culture. And this is definitely a San Francisco cultural thing. So Jasmine, you are truly the perfect guest. Thank you so much for coming on Odd Lots.
I am so excited to be here.
So first of all, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about what peptides actually are and how they first came onto your radar screen?
Right. So peptides are basically short chains of amino acids. They are the building blocks of proteins. There are peptides that are naturally occurring in the human body. So for example, oxytocin, like you have right there, we produce it during pregnancy when you hug somebody, hug your partner, hug your family member. But there are also synthetic peptides that are manufactured in labs, or people can take these peptides that already exist in the human body and inject extra of it if your body, say, doesn't produce enough. So insulin, for example, is an example of a peptide that's been used, obviously, to treat diabetics for a very long time. So peptides are actually a very broad class of drugs, but I think the interest in more experimental peptides and within biohacking communities and things like that has really exploded in recent years. I would trace it to basically the boom in GLP-1 use A lot of folks who I spoke to over the past few weeks who have been experimenting with peptides and injecting them themselves first started getting comfortable with even the idea of injections, which were previously seen as a bit intense for people.
Yeah, you're injecting yourself with drugs. That has certain connotations.
Right. But I think that GLP-1s and Ozempic and Wegovy were what really popularized it and made people comfortable. So it first came on my radar, aside from the GLP story, because I started seeing tweets that I'm sure you guys have seen too, all over SF Tech Twitter about how everybody has a Chinese peptide dealer now. I thought this was kind of a joke until I started mentioning it in conversations, and I realized that my friends were on Chinese peptides. They were like, wait, Jasmine, are you not on these? They're amazing. I got to get you on these peptides. I got a dealer. I got my guy. And I'm like, what are you on about? And I think the first one that I heard about people using, which is the most popular that I have since heard, is retatrutide, which is what some people call a GLP-3. So basically, GLP-1s are through the FDA process. People are like something like 12% of Americans, depending on what survey you look at, are using them. But there are now next generation weight loss drugs that work on not just the GLP-1 receptors, but also the GIP receptors and the glucagon receptors to encourage even faster weight loss. And these GLP-3s, like retatrutide, are still in phase 2 clinical trials. But because people have been watching this space, they're seeing really good results in those clinical trials. Some folks have thought, okay, let me go straight to the source. I'm going to find a Chinese manufacturer that makes retatrutide for cheap, and I will import them at a low cost of maybe $100, $200 a month from one of these gray market suppliers and use them myself for weight loss for 1/5 of the cost that I was getting my prescription Ozempic at, or something like that.
I promised you this was a supply chain episode.
This is already great. Obviously, we want to talk more about peptides. That's what we're here to talk about. But I actually just want to back up 1 second because you're a San Francisco culture reporter, among other things, and you write great stuff about AI and communication, all that stuff. One thing I think about a lot these days is that we all know that people in San Francisco really have a very big influence on all of our lives, right? Because they design the digital products that essentially constitute what makes modern living distinct. But one thing I feel like, and I struggle around my articulate this, all of these other things that are part of the contemporary San Francisco lifestyle, whether it's sort of like believing in AI doom scenarios, et cetera, it's like weird cults that they form. Like, to some extent, this is such an important beat that you're on because we are all living in the shadows of what has going on in these people's brains, right? Like, these ideas that they think about, body hacking and so forth, they become the sort of like consumer products and so forth that everyone just sort of uses without ever thinking about like some of the philosophical gestalt behind it all.
Totally. I mean, I think that's totally right. That's why I love the San Francisco beat. I've sort of collapsed it too. Like, honestly, I just report on San Francisco, whether that is, in the beginning of 2025, a lot of it was about the young tech right. And why did that happen? It's about AI, all the weird sub-ideologies from AI doom to the successionists who actually think that AI has a moral duty to replace the human species because they're superior to us. There are all these weird strains of thought. And I think SF, especially this year, increasingly prides itself on sort of being the place where the future comes first. They've sort of re-embraced that identity of like, we're going to have funerals for AI models that we miss. We are embracing robotaxi abundance with Tesla robotaxis and Zooxes and Waymos, and we're going to be the ones to trial this stuff first. I'm going to a peptide rave this Saturday with a cyberpunk dress code.
Sounds very San Francisco.
There's a lot. It's very San Francisco. There are underground robot fights that I'm sure you guys have seen videos of. But I think San Francisco is really leaning into its identity these days of we are kind of going to be the place that is not sort of suffering under the regulatory decelerationist burden that's plaguing the rest of the Western world. And we're going to embrace the frontier. And I think peptides are part of that. It's a signaling thing as much as a health thing.
Well, okay, speaking of the tech community, is it true that something like oxytocin, it actually improves your eye contact? And the way I heard it was this could be helpful for people
autists
who are in tech and maybe aren't that sociable.
Oh my God. Yeah. So the oxytocin is the only peptide that I've personally tried. I think I first heard about it because Will DePue, who's like a young AI researcher at OpenAI, tweeted about it as, I think nasal oxytocin is going to be Ozempic for autism, which is an incredible line. What the hell is this? And it's been tested on people with Asperger's to help improve, again, those feelings of social connection, empathy, warmth that comes as a nasal spray you can get for $50, $60 off Amazon or something. So I also, like you, Tracy, when I tried it, I didn't think it worked, but my friends did insist that I was a little bit friendlier than I normally am. And I was, in fact, making more eye contact. So
okay,
maybe
we're going to have to do some experiments here at All Thoughts and just have a bunch of conversations where we're on and off the oxytocin and see what happens.
We got to try. I really could have used that in college. For sure. So there's all kinds of ones, right? So, okay, GLP-1's weight loss. This one supposedly helps you with eye contact and connection. What are some of the other things that people are using peptides for?
So aside from the GLP-1s and the GLP-3s, which are the most popular, there are all sorts of peptides. They are a really, really broad class of chemical. So the most popular other than that is BPC-157, which supposedly helps with muscle healing and regeneration. So after a really hard workout, that one has been experimented with in bodybuilding communities for many years. So there's all these crazy bodybuilding forums where people are playing with this stuff and human growth hormone and things like that. There is melanotan, which supposedly increases melanin production in the skin. So I talked to a founder, a CEO of a unicorn logistics company who told me that his first peptide was melanotan because he hated being a ginger. He had always wanted to stop being a ginger, so he cured it by taking this thing that increases your melanin production and makes you tanner. Another person described it to me as the hot, horny, and tan peptide. So that one, for those who aren't getting enough sunlight, shut in an office, maybe that's your pick. There is epitalon, which folks have credited with improving their sleep. There's CMAX, which people believe helps with their anxiety. To be clear, most of the peptides, aside from the GLPs, have not been in any human trials whatsoever. So a lot of this sort of comes from anecdotal evidence and people experimenting rather than from like FDA approved or like RCTs. And some of these, only have animal trials or cell culture in vitro tests.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this actually, because my impression is peptides, there's not much profit to be made from them for the pharma companies. And so it's just not worth it to them to actually test on humans. And yet they're still commercially available.
That is one of the stories I heard because, I asked, well, GLP-1s have been so profitable. So why aren't people trying to push through FDA trials these other peptides that people have been crediting with transformative health improvements or whatever? And the story I heard is that because peptides are these very small, very basic chains, they're too commoditized, basically, at the point where these Chinese factories are able to, without a ton of extremely advanced scientific knowledge, be able to manufacture them en masse. No company is going to want to invest $100 million, $1 billion in getting it through the excruciating FDA trial process. And so that sort of left peptides in this gray market environment where people are saying okay, I might as well go import this stuff from China, maybe get it purity tested myself. It's going to cost a few $100s in total. And let's just see.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I don't love the idea of sticking myself with needles, but then also I don't love the idea of sticking myself with needles for some random thing that came from a factory.
Or having a dealer, right?
Yeah,
that has certain connotations.
My thing. And I want to get into the legal aspects of all of this as well. But yeah, talk to us about just the comfort that people have with, frankly, injecting themselves with chemicals that they probably have no idea what's in there, can't verify it, or have no idea how the quality of the lab in China that they're getting them from.
Yeah, so I've interviewed probably a dozen plus people, peptide users in and around the tech community over the past few weeks. And I will say that almost everyone I spoke to, I'd ask hey, are you scared? Are you worried? Did you have to get over a mental hump with this stuff? And most of them would tell me, you know what, I have a higher risk tolerance than most people. Yeah. I think this is something that, say, startup founders in particular really pride themselves on. And a lot of these people were startup founders, right? They think I'm the kind of person who is willing to take risks. I'm the kind of person who doesn't really need to wait until I'm given permission to do something, whether that's by a regulator or by some boss. I can sort of study up in my own way, and that's good enough. So I think people were surprisingly they were very comfortable telling me there is some risk. I know that there have been some negative side effects, but you know what? I keep a journal every day. I have friends who have used it. I'm going to suppliers that are showing their testing certifications from top peptide testing firms. And that's good enough for me, even though I wouldn't recommend that everybody do this. But you're right, Joe. This is a legal gray area, or some people would even say black market. So use of the vast majority of these peptides, particularly the non-GLPs, no human trials, no FDA approval, whether for pharmaceutical use or for use in compounding pharmacies, which GLPs have been somewhat approved for. What that means is that it is an illegal gray area because they're also not on DEA lists. So they're also not in the sort of illicit drug list. It's sort of we don't know. And so one funny thing that people joke about is all of the vials for these peptides will say for research use only.
Right.
Because
everyone's conducting peptide research, apparently.
Exactly. So these Chinese manufacturers, what they are allowed to do is to ship peptides around the world for research use, for scientists, for medical researchers, for bioresearchers. And so as long as you're not saying it's for human use, you don't have to prove a certain level of purity standard. You don't need necessarily a factory that follows CGMP protocols, which are an FDA approval to know that a factory meets certain quality standards. But again, research use has a lower bar. So people are basically importing the peptides for research use. And then what they'll sometimes do is then ship it separately to purity testing firms. So they're different ones that people trust and don't, located in the US, located in Europe, but they'll basically take their batch of peptides that they got from the Chinese manufacturer, take a few samples, ship them off to a testing site, get a certification that it's pure or it's impure, and then they will go mix them themselves. Certain suppliers will basically serve as the American middlemen. They will be US-based companies that will negotiate with the Chinese factories themselves, sort of figure out which ones are trusted by running purity tests on like 10 different Chinese factories they find, pick the one that they trust the most, and then sort of offer their brand's guarantee of running the purity testing process for the US buyers. And so like it really depends on people's risk tolerance. I've spoken with people who are going direct and literally just being in contact with the manufacturers themselves. I've also spoken to people who have said, I'm willing to use this US middleman supplier that my friends are all using and say is legit and is providing these tests and certifications, but I'm not going to go straight to the factory.
Talk to us about the info sharing a little bit more, because this is one aspect of the peptide community, I guess you would call it, is everyone is sort of sharing maybe their personal dealer, personal supplier, and also info on their personal experience with efficacy.
Totally. I think the sort of epistemology of the space is super interesting because it's very word of mouth based, very anecdotal. And I think it is rooted in a growing distrust of the medical establishment and established sources. So people are sort of embracing this do your own research. So I would say that quote unquote bro wellness influencers like Joe Rogan or Andrew Huberman have both talked extensively about these peptides to their very wide audiences. So followers in those communities are learning about them. There's a lot of word of mouth, for example, at certain gyms, trainers and people who train together will be sharing their peptide stacks. One of the folks who I spoke to learned about the peptides at Less Online, which is a rationalist conference that happens every spring. There was a GLP-1 session that she went to. She then discovered this person that everybody else was on retatrutide instead. And they all decided to tell her, hey, we're all still alive, so like you should get on this. There's less wrong posts on the rationalist forum describing people's day-by-day experiences with peptides. There are amateur Substack blogs. There are very shady Telegram and Discord groups where people are advertising their suppliers, though honestly, I think I would not choose a supplier off like a Telegram or Discord group personally, but it is kind of the Wild West out there in terms of information. And most people are really just going off social proof and the people that they personally know.
You know, we did an episode a while back about Adderall. And of course, a lot of people who are, you know, work in front of a computer feel that they can get some edge on Adderall. Is there like a level of competitiveness, though, in the culture such that you feel like, look, other people are, maybe they're more locked in, maybe they're better at office politics or maybe better at pitching a VC because you know, they've got their, where people feel like they have to be on these or they feel like they have to optimize their peptide stack so that they can compete and sort of be at their best.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the YC founders I talked to, she literally said, it's another thing I can optimize just like my SEO. She runs a SaaS business as her day job. Or Another thing that somebody in these communities told me is these people, like, sometimes they're not overweight. In fact, a lot of the time, these folks are not actually overweight. And the reason they're taking, say, retatrutide or a weight loss peptide is because they want to eliminate the food noise so they don't have to take a break for lunch. They can just be locked in for 16 hours straight. Or like, why do you have to go to the gym, which is going to, drain your ability to run a few more experiments or whatever, when you could just be taking one of these? And so I think there is a lot of this optimization ethic that is driving people's desire. Another piece that I'm sort of thinking about is whether the looks maxing trends, have impacted Silicon Valley as well. So one of the founders who I spoke to who was using a weight loss peptide mentioned that she watches YC launch videos and she realizes none of the founders are overweight anymore. And I'm going to have to be on video if I'm a founder. I'm going to have to go on podcasts. And I want to make sure that I look my best. So I do think that these sort of optimization trends are impacting peptide use as well.
Yeah, this is something we've discussed on the show before, but this idea that looks maxing is going to become more important as information gets commoditized or the knowledge economy gets commoditized via AI, then your only edge is going to be basically what you look like and how you interact with people. By the way, I'm a big fan of no lunch in the office. Joe knows this. Yeah. I refuse to eat like the sad salads that cost $20 over here in New York. I find it's better just to save my calories for like a really nice dinner. But anyway, talk to us about how you see the future of peptides kind of unrolling, because it does seem to be, it's kind of a weird thing where these are becoming more popular. And presumably we're just at the beginning stages of people hearing about this and more people consuming them. But there's little to no sign of FDA approval or these becoming sort of, I don't want to say legalized because they're in this gray market area, but made official in some way.
Right. It's hard to say. Everyone I spoke to, whether suppliers or doctors in California, definitely said that they saw peptide use booming this year. I've been seeing more news in mainstream newspaper outlets about personal peptide use. I think that peptide use is going to explode. I mean, as soon as people realize that I can be paying $200 for the same semaglutide that I am currently getting for $1,200, I find it very hard to imagine that that is not going to explode. There are TikTok influencer niches telling you how to mix the bacteriostatic water with the powdered stuff in the vials and how to inject it if you've never done it before. As for the policy environment, I think it's hard to predict. Last year, RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, said that he would end the Biden administration's war on peptides. He sort of has embraced these take your health into your own hands, like experimental therapeutics. At the same time, there hasn't actually been action so far this year by the Health and Human Services Administration to bring peptides into a more legal zone. So while RFK has signaled that he will, there hasn't been policy action yet. I did reach out to the HHS and the FDA for comment, and they said that they cannot predict future regulation, but that they are actively revising the list of bulk peptides that are allowed for compounding and compounding pharmacies. So sort of classic, we don't know, maybe looking at it language, but folks in the peptide community are really hoping to see a more, at least laissez-faire regulatory stance where they're not going to be shutting down these peptide suppliers.
Jasmine Sun, that was absolutely amazing. You were truly the perfect guest to talk about the intersection of peptides and San Francisco culture. So thank you so much for coming on All Thoughts.
Thanks so much for having me. Better get ready for my peptide rave.
Yeah,
that's right.
Have fun.
So, Joe, Jasmine did a great job of introducing us to the peptide space, about which we don't really know anything, but I think we need to talk to someone who's actually in the business.
Yeah, this is one of those stories where it's obviously a cultural story, but it's also a supply chain, regulation, marketing standpoint, which is like, where are they all coming from? How are they getting them? And for me, it's like, how do people have any confidence like what they're literally injecting into their bodies?
Right.
Where is this coming from?
So I have the perfect second guest. We're going to be speaking with Zach David. He is the managing partner of Persec Technologies, which runs Peptide Partners, which is a supplier of peptides. So Zach, how did you get into this space? Because you've had an interesting career path.
Right. I got into this space basically solving the problem for myself. A few years ago, my health was very poor, and I started working with a specialist in the wellness and longevity community and functional medicine. And I noticed the peptide therapies that she was prescribing were highly effective, but also extremely expensive. So then I started doing a little supply chain sleuthing of my own and found a much better solution to that. And the question that she asked was, do you think it would be legal for me to do that for my patients? And the answer is, of course, no. But that set off a 14-month investigation on how to bring that into the legal market, which is what we're eventually working on.
Why don't you tell us just sort of the basics of what you do? What is the service your business provides?
So very similar to what I went through. A lot of these peptide therapies are either multi-year or lifelong, and they exist, and people are going to Chinese peptides to find cheaper solutions. And so we started pushing for independent testing, for endotoxin screening, for heavy metals testing, which the incumbents in the industry were not doing at all at the time. And now pretty much everybody is.
So I have so many questions already, but how do you actually go about finding a supplier for a particular peptide? Because I imagine, you're dealing with people who are all the way over in China. There's probably a lot of different companies to choose from and not that much information out there about them. How do you even begin to go about doing this?
There's a good mix of how to find them. A lot advertise on, say, TikTok, or they'll find you on WhatsApp. They will hunt down your website and then introduce themselves as suppliers. And so we go through a long vetting process. By some estimates, there are 10 major manufacturers. And then there are a handful that manufacture in-house. And then there's something called lyophilization, which is kind of like the finishing step that puts it in the bottles. We're just constantly talking to new potential suppliers, and we'll give them a try. We'll send everything out for testing. And the labs that we use are based in the US that follow USP standards and FDA guidelines, which is a little bit different than some of the more popular testing labs that are overseas.
Okay, talk us through the step-by-step. Okay, you find a supplier based in China, you like them, whatever, et cetera. Where does it arrive when it gets to the U.S.? Does it go to the lab first? Does it go to you? And if it goes to you, what percentage of vials or what percentage of whatever is actually checked such that you can say, okay, this is a good batch?
Right. So we randomly sample from, say, we order 1,000 vials, we'll randomly sample between 3 and 5.
Okay.
And if the variance in the quality is very tight, then we consider that a good batch. We famously throw out batches we don't consider up to our standards. And sometimes we'll post pictures of us dumping it in the trash on Twitter, which gets us a little cachet. But it's not fun to dump money in the garbage, but sometimes you have to do it.
Can I just ask about the sequence of the chain, in particular, because it is a peptide? What is the type of storage that it has to be involved in, from the container on the ship to the dock? Is it a temperature type thing? How do you ensure that sort of quality doesn't degrade during the shipping process?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you were shipping very large amounts, you would want a cold chain supply the entire route. However, the lyophilization process keeps things shelf stable for quite a long time. And recent studies have shown that it doesn't degrade as fast as people initially thought. So when we use commercial grade freezers, as soon as we get it in, and then we'll label the vials, and then we'll randomly sample.
Tell us more about the manufacturers in China, because I'm having a sort of hard time wrapping my head around who they actually are. So I take it most of them are not big pharma offshoots. They're sort of independent manufacturers. But how are these companies actually, I guess, coming into being?
Yeah, so there's an interesting mix of what are the gray market manufacturers and, well, let's call it the lit market manufacturers. There are a handful of $10 to $15 billion publicly traded companies in China that do contract manufacturing, but they only sell to FDA supply, like FDA registered companies with supply chains. The major gray market labs They only sell to other companies within China who then finish it with the lyophilization and then sell directly to the consumers.
And what's the actual material that makes up a peptide? When we're talking about peptides, like what are the building blocks of a particular, I get a vial in the mail. What is it exactly?
So the FDA definition is an amino acid chain of 40 or less. That definition was added to the Federal Register in 2020. And it is no surprise that things like semaglutide, otherwise known as Ozempic, Mounjaro, otherwise known as tirzepatide, and the next generation that everyone is currently using called retatrutide, all happen to be exactly 39 in length. So I think there was some clever lobbying, but also things less than 50 tend to be very stable, unlike larger proteins, which tend to fold in on themselves. And the manufacturing process called solid phase peptide synthesis is almost a solved problem.
But how do we actually make amino acids?
That is a good question. I would have to follow up with you on that. Some are naturally derived and some are synthetic. The resurgence in peptides from its original heyday is partially due to synthetic amino acids.
Just talk to us about law and regulation. What is the stance of these things? I actually still don't totally understand. Are they legal to be sold? I don't know what this term gray market means, et cetera. Just walk to us about how the government, whether we're talking criminal authorities or just FDA type authorities, think about these things right now.
So the guidance is very careful. There has to be a lot of disclaimers about not for human use on anything sold for research purposes. Doctors can prescribe them. For example, there's one called sermorelin, where it was abandoned by the manufacturer for economic reasons, not for safety reasons, in around 2008. But you can get it from compounding pharmacies in the United States. And so doctors it was formally FDA approved. However, things from compounding pharmacies do not undergo the same safety standards, but doctors will still prescribe stuff like that. The FDA, I think, how should we put this? When it's for research use only, and you're legitimately selling for research use, it does not fall under there.
So a lot of people are conducting peptide research in the comfort of their own homes.
Yes, as I'm sure most Odd Lots listeners are aware, the market for micropipettes is growing 8% year over year, projected through 2030. So I do believe that a lot of people have the home labs. Yeah.
Wait, micropipettes? What are we?
Yes.
Little pipettes.
What is that? Oh, that's like a little thing to extract some liquid? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
So this is our proxy for peptide consumption, is the booming market for micropipettes.
Is the booming market for micropipettes.
I'll take it.
It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but...
No, but this is useful. It's like, okay, like if we see this thing rising, then intuitively this is what they're using for. So in your marketing, what do you have to say, such as that you don't run afoul of people in D.C. or wherever?
We have strict terms and conditions for research use only, labeled on the boxes, labeled on the vials, labeled on the website. We do not even use the term dosing. We only talk about sample sizes, and we are very, very, very pro-research. But there is a big movement of people who self-organize in Telegram and Discord communities who are experimenting on themselves.
Longtime internet friend of the podcast, Chairman Burb.
Oh, yes.
I saw she had a Chinese peptide rave in San Francisco this week.
Yes.
Are you there, Zach?
Yes, we sponsored it. It was nice. We had a great time. She's a very, very, very good friend of mine.
I'm guessing that's the same one Jasmine went to, probably.
I assume.
Unless there are...
I don't know, San Francisco. Could there be 2 Chinese peptide raves in one weekend? It would not surprise me at the slightest.
So, Zach, how do you actually decide which peptides to stock? Is it whichever ones are getting the most buzz on TikTok? Do the manufacturers approach you with new things that they're making and then you test them out?
That's a very good question, because the formularies change a lot. Although between the manufacturers and the suppliers, they do have very, very similar formularies. The ones who deal with the controlled substances and anabolics, we tend to stay away from. But the ones that we stock, we look for good safety profiles in humans. Unfortunately, for almost all of these, there are not a lot of good randomized control trials, but a lot of them have good safety studies in humans. But so certain things, like there's a popular one called AOD 9604, which has not had a successful human trial ever. And so we just decided not to stock that for ethical reasons.
Okay, so we know that in theory, well, we know more than in theory that the most famous peptides can curb your appetite and therefore facilitate weight loss. Tracy had a little thing of a spray that ostensibly helped autists make better eye contact, which is, of course, a valuable skill if you want to live in human civilization. What are some of the other popular, what are the other things that people are consuming peptides? Are there any that might surprise us?
So there is a class called growth hormone releasing peptides or growth hormone stimulating peptides. They have very short half-lives. Rather than like HGH replacement therapy, like human growth hormone replacement therapy, which will eventually cause your body to naturally stop producing its own, this class works with your pituitary to make like an impulse and release some growth hormone rather than replace it. So that would be good for like
weightlifters or bodybuilders or anyone who just wants more strength, or that what we're talking about?
And yeah, and it's also been increasingly prescribed by physicians for improved sleep as well.
Could use that.
Why don't we manufacture peptides in the US? How is it that China seems to dominate this particular market?
That is a great question as well. I believe it's the input materials and the labor and expertise required to engineer it. What happens is a lot of the raw materials are produced in China, and then over here they're finished in facilities like doing the lyophilization and purification steps by compounding pharmacies.
Okay, everyone who uses these, they have to inject them. Is it all needles and vials?
Mostly at this time. However, we've seen an increasing amount of oral formulations. The problem is because these are small molecules, the digestive system breaks them down very quickly. So creating reliable oral formulations for peptide therapies has been historically very difficult.
How do you reduce costs in this space? Is it buying in bulk from a particular supplier, or, I don't know, finding cheaper manufacturers of vials and the ionization process?
Lyophilization.
Lyophilization.
It's just a fancy word for freeze drying.
Okay, all right. Yeah. The freeze drying process then. That's easier.
Right. Yeah. So it is buying in larger and larger quantities. One of our manufacturing partners over there, they created a novel method of being able to produce large quantities of raw materials. And the next step in our company's evolution is going to be buying a manufacturing facility and starting to do that finishing step here and slowly over time bring this above board and fully FDA compliant.
Am I stupid for not using peptides? I work in a very competitive industry. I have a very demanding schedule. I have 2 children. I'm 45, and so I'm at the second half of the curve where my body is getting a little deteriorating and getting a little bit closer to death each day. Like, am I stupid for like not tasting the fruits of advanced science?
That is a question between you and your physician.
Okay. That is a very smart answer. Do you feel that it is an important element of your ability to thrive and compete, your research into peptides?
I do. I like them a lot. I've noticed a lot of good changes, especially in my health, my energy over the years. But I also do work closely with a physician and under the care of one.
Can I ask you a little bit about marketing? How do people discover your company?
How do people discover? So let's see. Word of mouth has been great. Several influencers have written about like the cost effectiveness of our product. And then there's a website called Finric, which has started to offer this wonderful service where people can send in vials from anyone that they buy from off any of these research use only sites. I think they've covered over 140 companies now. And we've started to take #1 slots on their site just left and right. So I think we're doing something a little bit better than everyone else.
So people are crowdsourcing a lot of the research and reviews. And also, I guess you hold peptide raves, right? That's a marketing thing.
that was once. It might happen again. I'm not much of a dancer, but I did field some questions.
Something that sort of works a little bit like human growth hormone. I get it's very appealing. Weight loss, again, concentrate. Are there any surprising peptides? What's the most unexpected thing that a peptide might, in research, suggest could benefit someone?
I don't know if I should say this out loud.
Yeah, that means you definitely should say it out loud.
Yeah, okay. Well, there is one peptide that goes under the name PT141. Its brand name, it's actually an FDA-approved one. It's called Vyleesi. And it is meant for low sex drive.
It's completely legitimate. Nothing wrong with saying that out loud. For men and women?
Okay. It's meant for women, but according to people who have told me, it works for men as well.
Many people are saying, what's the customs process actually like for this? Because I imagine, customs is a pain at the best of times. And I imagine for something like this, it's potentially even more complicated. And then also, have you been impacted by tariffs at all?
Yeah, it was really fun to see the first time a UPS driver asked for cash on delivery since like 1998.
Why is
remember cash on delivery? That was when tariffs first came back, and no one really knew. No one had the infrastructure to charge in advance. Now they'll let you know, hey, you're gonna owe $30 here, $60 here.
There's like an online payment portal too, right? It's not.
But originally there wasn't. Yeah. The driver showed up and wanted a check.
It's interesting. This
it was crazy.
I'm reading about this PT141. So unlike Viagra, which famously opens up blood flow pathways, this one, its method of action is actually to increase the underlying sexual excitement itself, which is sort of different. Anyway, it's interesting.
I have heard that it works.
You've heard that it works.
Yep. I don't have any experience with it, but I've heard that it works.
Wait, so what does the customs documentation actually look like? When the stuff arrives at a port, what forms are you filling out?
They're fun. They're half in Mandarin, so it's a little difficult. But...
well, scan it, ChatGPT, we're fine. Language doesn't matter these days.
How long do you think it's going to take, if it happens at all, for these sorts of peptides to become, as you put it, above board in the U.S.?
So there's an interesting history there. So the most popular ones, basically in September 2023, we call the peptide Armageddon. About 20 of the most popular ones that were prescribed by doctors in the wellness and longevity community were put on this, what's called the 503A banned list. And they banned the prescribing of, or the compounding of certain peptides. And according to my physician, it was not for particularly good scientific reasons, but the explanation that they give is that it can trigger adverse immune responses.
Last question for me. Has there been any change in D.C. since the changing of the administration in terms of either at the FDA or otherwise?
So I go through all of the enforcement letters that and you can go on the website and you can see every enforcement letter and every warning letter that they send to every single website. And I believe the last one ever sent was December 2024. So there has not been a lot of enforcement.
Yeah, that's a pretty big hint. All right, Zach, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming on Odd Lots. That was super interesting.
I'm such a huge fan of yours. It's been great.
Thank you.
We're going to use that in the sizzle reel. Thank you so much, Zach.
So, Joe, that was really interesting.
So interesting.
Fun episode. Obviously, it intersects with a bunch of Odd Lots themes, primarily competition with China in the biotech space and also supply chain issues and medical regulation.
Are we going to see the White House adopt a industrial policy to wean us off of our dependence on China for experimental peptides? Does anyone talk about that?
What I was about to say is actually we've talked about this before, but you could envision a world where knowledge becomes very commodified because of AI.
Yeah.
And so everyone's competitive edge is basically what you look like, how you present yourself and interact with others. So maybe in that economy, peptides have a lot of value.
Absolutely. I could totally see it. I mean, the way I think about that question is we don't even need to talk about AI in the sense that we are already on this path, right? People have been looks-maxing prior to the invention of chatbots. People have felt ever since maybe since the iPhone or maybe since Instagram, et cetera.
Looks
all
have
of this
always
pressure.
mattered, but I think we're at a sort of different point. Yeah.
No, what I'm saying is like this already feels like it's accelerating some of these trends. Absolutely. Looks have always mattered. People have always been anxious about their weight, et cetera. But it does feel like this pressure is just building where everyone is thinking about these things. Everyone feels very competitive, all of these things. And everyone is open about how competitive
very
they are about
open.
These things.
It's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Right? There was a time when people didn't talk about things like their plastic surgery, but now it seems more transparent than it used to be. The other thing I was thinking about just in terms of regulation, I mean, it's notable that it's a gray market, right? As we described. And ostensibly, everyone is doing peptide research in their basements. And that's kind of a joke, right? But on the other hand, it's not really a joke because what we're doing is kind of outsourcing human trials, I guess, to like citizens who are opting in. They're the ones opting in to test these new treatments.
You know, it's interesting. We did that episode with D.A. Wallach, and he talked about how we could have a model of sort of market for pharmaceuticals and therapies in which the only thing required to sell something is the safety trial. Because right now, for any therapy, we do safety and then efficacy. But it is you could argue that really the only thing that should be required is a safety trial, and then it's up to the consumer or whatever. I think you could make that argument that then it's up to the doctor and the consumer together to decide, is this worthwhile given the price of what we know about it, et cetera. But what it feels like to me is we're sort of entering this era in which, regardless of what the formal law states or what regulations state, there is a cultural move towards letting people experiment as they want with things that, by and large, it doesn't sound like there's much evidence of particularly harmful, dangerous with a lot of this stuff. Maybe
no one has died from peptides that I know.
As far as I know, I haven't seen that, et cetera. And so it feels like we're sort of, this is part of the hacker culture. It's like, okay, there's probably not much danger, I suppose, but what it does for you, that's on you to figure out.
All right. Thank you, everyone who is experimenting with peptides. You're doing it for the greater good, I'm sure. Shall we leave it there?
Let's leave it there.
This has been another episode of the Odd Lots podcast. I'm Tracy Alloway. You can follow me at Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal. You can follow me at The Stalwart. Follow our guest Jasmine Sun. She's at Jasmine New Sun. And Zach David. He's at Zach David. Follow our producers Carmen Rodriguez at Carmen Armin, Dashiell Bennett at Dashbot, and Kale Brooks at Kale Brooks. For more Odd Lots content, go to Bloomberg.com/oddlots. We have a daily newsletter on all of our episodes. And you can chat about all of these topics 24/7 in our Discord, discord.gg/oddlots.
And if you enjoy Odd Lots, if you like it when we talk about the peptide supply chain, then please leave us a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, if you are a Bloomberg subscriber, you can listen to all of our episodes absolutely ad-free. All you need to do is find the Bloomberg channel on Apple Podcasts and follow the instructions there. Thanks for listening.